This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today is Thursday. It's January 4th, 2024, election year. Please follow us on thetruthcentral.com. We're doing podcasts every weekday. And on Twitter or X, I am at Corsi Jerome 1. It's all together, all small case, CORSIJEROME, the number 1. Today we've got a lot of news out. Much of it's kind of a rehash day, but there's some important things. This Epstein file has now begun to be released, and there's not a lot of huge surprises in it so far. I guess the big news that seems to be coming out of it has to do with Bill Clinton, which, again, as I say, is not really news, but Clinton is mentioned as one of the John Does in this release of information. And of course, we all knew that was coming. That's been known for a long time. And nothing happens from it. That's the big disappointing part of this, is that nothing happens. So Clinton is John Doe number 36. And in part of the transcript that was released, it evidently said something, did Jeffrey Epstein ever talk to you about Bill Clinton? And yes, he said, I guess whomever this deposition was, this being reported by Technofog on X. And from one of the witnesses said, yes, and Clinton liked his girls very young. Clinton liked them young, referring to girls. Yes, well, of course, this is Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein had a picture of Bill Clinton in his living room with Clinton wearing a dress and high heels, and it was a disgusting picture, really. And he dressed up as a kind of like a transgender, whatever that means these days. And so, therefore, Jeffrey Epstein had a long list of people. Prince Andrew, the list goes on and on. It appears that Trump really was not involved with Epstein. Trump certainly got Epstein thrown out of Mar-a-Lago, and Trump was not nearly as tied in with Epstein as you might imagine. But of course, now we've got this LGBT plus P for pedosexual. So already there's a normalization going on in the gender confusion community, this woke community, trying to blend it into pedophilia as just being acceptable. I mean, what comes next? Bestiality? Where are we going with this? I mean, this is really down a path that's pretty dark, and it's been done before in human history. Certainly at the end of the Roman Empire, they were into bizarre sexual behavior, that extremely bizarre. And of course, these people here today will get there too, because there'll be nothing that is not acceptable once they have no bounds or no morality or no limits or no concern that sex is for procreation. I mean, this is almost laughable to these people. And so therefore, this is one of the fundamental transitions that has gone on in terms of normalizing bizarre sexual behavior, which is what the left is all about these days. That's one of their main agendas. And of course, I point this out in the book I've written on the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy, is that since the Frankfurt School, the sexual revolution was the way to break down the traditional societal norms of marriage, believing in God, raising children. And once sex is completely disassociated from procreation, it just becomes a amusement, and then anything goes. As Cole Porter said, anything goes. Well, this is a new territory, and again, law enforcement's going to do absolutely nothing. And it appears now that Jeffrey Epstein was probably working with the intelligence agencies, was working with the FBI. Some of that's coming out in these files, and that when he was arrested at various times, he was not put in prison, but he had deals to share information. I'm sure the intelligence agencies were very interested in his files on the sexual activities of prominent people. So once you engage in this kind of behavior with Epstein, people don't realize that files are being created. Sexual behavior of this nature can be watched, and it sets up blackmail, or it sets up a whole aspect of Clinton, and Hillary's just the same. I mean, the stories about Hillary and being lesbian or bi. I mean, this is a phenomenon of democratic politics that has surfaced to a large extent. The whole issue again of Barack Obama and Larry Sinclair and their homosexual relationship, that's also surfaced in 2023. Again, these things continue to come back. Now, it's one of the points I'm going to make here in a minute. We're going to cover several things today. I kind of want to start out with the political story here, but it's not just Trump that the Democrats are trying to remove from the ballots. The Democrats are actually going after quite a few people, removing them, and they're doing it in the name of democracy. They're removing people from the ballots as democracy. It's insane. But the argument that they're utilizing here, a very interesting editorial piece written by the editorial board of the New York Times, this is New York Post, that was saying that, people who are cheering this Shayna Bellows for tossing Trump from Maine's ballot should remember Catherine Harris. Okay, now Catherine Harris was in 2000 when we had the recount in Florida between Al Gore and George W. Bush. George W. Bush had a Supreme Court decision which essentially stopped the recount, but there was also a decision by a minor state official whose name was this Catherine Harris, who ended the Florida recount and basically declared that Trump was the winner. Now, the Democrats at that point went insane. They said, how could a minor Florida state official, decide a presidential election? And at that time, the Democrats had no problem objecting to an election being unfair. They weren't insurrectionists. They were not considering themselves to do anything except demand recounts and demand that the votes be counted. Back then, it was make every vote count. Well, today, the standards have completely flipped because Donald Trump, in the 2020 election, was challenging that the election was not fair. He was challenging these mail-in ballots had been massively fraudulent in several of the states. Now, the Democrats consider that an insurrection, overturning a legitimate election, which the Democrats have declared to be legitimate. And of course, all the procedures where the states certified Biden as the winner. Congress, when it held the January 6th electoral vote certification, certified the election for Biden. So all the official processes were done for Biden to be legitimately the president. But what was outlawed in the censorship issue was the ability to go in and examine in detail whether or not the mail-in ballots had been fraudulent. So as soon as the states certified the election, that issue was closed. Now, again, it's still being litigated because Donald Trump is being considered an insurrectionist, and people have been challenged in Georgia, and some of the attorneys, Sidney Powell, actually took a plea deal on saying she was interfering with the election because she was making statements challenging whether or not all the votes were legitimate. Now, again, the Democrats are doing this in the name of democracy, but democracy to the Democrats means social democracy. They're social Democrats. They're not just Democrats, they're social Democrats. In other words, democracy to them means social justice. It doesn't mean equality in voting. It doesn't mean that everybody has a chance to cast a legitimate vote. It means that you have to have the outcome being in accordance with this critical theory That, in other words, everything is racism. So, in other words, there can be double standards. You can have a black woman president of Harvard with plagiarism, which if a white male did that, they would certainly be drummed out of the university. And this Claudine Gay is still at Harvard, even though she may no longer be the president. These are double standards. And what the Democrats are now doing is challenging various people for Congress, running for Congress. They're trying to eliminate rivals by saying that they were insurrectionists because they went along with the argument that the 2020 election had massive voter fraud. Chris, do you want to comment on this? You also have done a lot of research on this, and I think it's a very open issue that it does penetrate down to the state level. And there's below the surface of Donald Trump, the Democrats have seized onto this, getting rid of their opponents by trying to wipe them off the ballot.
Exactly. And not only the Republicans are they trying to knock off the ballot, they're trying to get rid of the major threat named Marianne Williamson and any other Democrat rivals who wish to challenge Joe Biden in a primary. First off, these people are no threat. My guess, and again, now my hypothesis on this one is they just don't want Joe Biden to actually have to address a primary or commit any resources to something like this. Not that he'd have to at this point, but they don't want anything like this to happen to expose him, like basically to expose him like they tried not to expose him during the 2020 election. Hide him in the basement, make sure he doesn't say anything unless it's very, very much controlled, and then throw him at the general election and hope that people hate the other guy enough to vote for Biden because none of his inadequacies or his policy problems were exposed.
Well, again, it's appalling. It's clearly evident that Biden is suffering some kind of mental, dementia. It's just not functioning.
But that's not even the real problem. The real problem is maybe he'll Woodrow Wilson it for the next few years, even if he does get elected. The problem are the people above him that are instituting the policy. The people in these unelected committees like the EPA or even the ATF instituting new rules that the citizens have to abide by because his administration's in power and not only allowing this, but engineering this kind of thing to happen.
And we have this massive bureaucracy, and Obama increased dramatically the size of the bureaucracy, unelected officials. And so Biden, by fiat, can say we're going to have X percentage of all automobiles have to be electric vehicles by this year. Now, people aren't buying electric vehicles. They're not. These are not functioning in terms of the infrastructure needed to support electric vehicles on a massive number. And again, the bureaucratic imposition of these rules, even in New York now with these traffic, ability to monitor traffic and not have anyone do it with people, just the cameras, and the cameras can recognize the license plate, so you can be fined for driving your car into a part of the city that's considered to be central business district. They want to reduce congestion, but they also have a climate agenda. They want to reduce carbon dioxide. They want to reduce the emissions from gasoline cars. And if you're driving an EV in the city, you might not be equally fine. So it's really not about congestion. It's about an ideological determination that there's, carbon dioxide causing global warming, which we've repeatedly argued on this show is nonsense. So, Chris, any final comment? Then we'll move on to the next story.
Keep also in mind that the attempts over the last 3-4 years to ingrain the idea that January 6th was not a protest but an insurrection were done by media allies of the Democrat Party. The idea was, hey, call it an insurrection and keep it going so most people believe that. People would go to work every day, get tired, get home, turn on the 6 o'clock news, hear the word insurrection without even knowing what really happened. This way, come election time, if Trump decides to run, you can use the insurrection clause, which they're doing quite loosely, of the 14th Amendment. And that's why these states and that Valley Girl over in Maine decided to try to bump Trump off the ballot.
And they're getting away with it.
Right, they are. Oh, sort of. sort of. There is backlash because there are people who think, and there are people who, and there are people who are saying this was not an insurrection, despite what's being said. When somebody calls, the other term is the big lie. Whenever I hear the big lie, somebody says, "Do you believe the big lie?" I said, "No, I don't believe that there was Russian collusion in 2016."
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. All these narratives have been run that are clearly destructive narratives, and they're not true.
Right.
Well, let's go to something that is true. The global debt circus. Okay, right now global debt is over $280 trillion. I mean, it has escalated dramatically in the past 10 years. And when you take a look at what the debt means, interest payments on the debt increased by 177 billion or 33%. I mean, these are numbers from the last year. Medicare spending increased by 128 billion. Medicaid spending by 24 billion. I mean, it's the $34 trillion debt, which we now have, is massive. And the inflation, every person in America today essentially owes more than $100,000. Okay, so if you take a look at the budget deficit of $1.7 trillion and put that into what the burden is on the American taxpayer, of course, with modern monetary theory, we're just printing the money, $1 trillion a year that we have to pay just to service the national debt of $34 trillion, pay the interest. Okay, so when you look at what it means in the economics of the average household, today the average family of four is paying about $14,700 yearly, or $1,224 per month, to purchase the same goods and services compared to the day when Joe Biden took office. I mean, that's a massive increase in inflation. And again, it's not reflected in the numbers. So the Federal Reserve says we've got inflation under control. Well, at 5% interest rates right now, it's tanking the mortgage market because, again, people don't want to sell their homes if they've got one of these zero interest loans that were given during the Obama years when the Federal Reserve was keeping interest rates at near zero in order to stimulate the economy, which is stagnant under Obama. And the debt service here is massive. I want to, if you'll take a look, and again, please, if you like the show, support our sponsors. Get a copy. You could, on the website, you can directly access, and Chris will show you how here in a minute, directly access Swiss America to get a copy of this free book, How the Coming Global Crash Will Create an Historic Gold Rush. Chris, do you want to explain that and demonstrate it to people? I think we'll take a minute here to get a little more attention to the website and our sponsors, because I think it's important to us that you're aware that we're trying to get people protected and from what we see is coming a massive global crash. I don't know if it'll be 2024, but gold is now trading at above $2,000 regularly. It's today about $2,055 an ounce. Chris?
It's very easy to get a hold of this book, The Coming Global Crash, How the Coming Global Crash Will Create an Historic Gold Rush. There are some easy ways to do so. First off, you can find out more about it on the website, thetruthcentral.com. That's thetruthcentral.com. You can find out a little more about that. You and Dean, by the way, Dr. Corsi, you talk about the book and what's really happening. You can also find Dean Heskin and Swiss America's podcast here, along with yours, The Secret War on Cash, on your website here, thetruthcentral.com. This is if you haven't been to the site yet, this is a hub of a lot of great things. Another one is the phone number where you can actually call to get this book for free. The Coming Global Crash, How the Coming Global Crash Will Create an Historic Gold Rush. First off, the number is 800-519-6268, and that's 800-519-6268. Now, those of you who are watching this can see that. Those of you who are listening on the podcast, because that's been growing, if you're on any of our many audio outlets, you can find the link in our description. So that'll be easy to find. You can also find the number on our website, again, thetruthcentral.com. And yes, Once again, I'm going to give you that number, 800-519-6268. You can hear directly from Dr. Corsi on the Truth Central podcast on the website. All of the shows are here. And you can hear the same from Dean Heskin, The Secret War on Cash, right here again. All of those podcasts are right here.
Okay, now there's another article I liked today that was this juggling act of 2024, pivotal year. And this is Brandon Smith. If you haven't followed it, it's on alt.market.us. It's a good site. I like to follow this site a bit, alt.market.us, alt-market.us. And what he's pointing out is that the COVID agenda essentially failed. What the goal of the globalists goals were to lock down society over a health emergency. It was a bad flu. It was not a pandemic where you got the disease and the next day you died. It did not have that impact at all. Now, it did, with people who had comorbidity, impact them significantly. But the point that being made here is that the real goal of the globalists was to get vaccine passports. So you had to have a vaccine passport in order to travel. And that, when it was tried to be imposed, I was watching the Italian television, for instance, around the holidays during the lockdown, as the lockdown was in full. If you wanted to go and visit family and you had permits to do it, you had to have a vaccine passport. And people were having their vaccine passport on their cell phones. So they were going through trains and making sure everybody had a vaccine passport, or you couldn't travel. Now, that failed because essentially the population was sick and tired of the lockdown. And now I think the whole idea of lockdowns has been significantly questioned. But the vaccine passports did not get introduced. Secondly, the public is fed up with this woke cult. I think finally the woke cult has gone too far. When you get a president of Harvard who is a black female and is excused for plagiarizing not only her dissertation, but much of her work, and then you have to say, is her pronoun her, or what is her pronoun, and what is her gender? Is she female with a gender of a Egyptian cat from 3,000 years ago, who was at that time transgender? Is that her gender? Now, this is a schizophrenic idea. The people who thought like this in times that were normal, being normal meaning there's rules, there's objective reality, all of which is denied by the wokes. You have to, whatever their particular personal construction is, you've got to take that as reality. Otherwise, you committed a microaggression. Okay, now this is insanity. So when you see things like the collapse of media giants, woke media giants like Disney, the successful boycotts of products like Bud Light and company targeting of Target, you realize that there is this whole LGBT cultism, this trans movement. People are beginning to say, well, LGBT, pedophilia, then we got to have bestiality, then we got to have changing sexuality, then we got to have, I don't know if I have sexuality. But this is insanity. And you got to remember, if that's what the universities are going to be about, we don't need universities. And then everybody gets out and protests at the university for Hamas. Hamas is a vicious terrorist organization that had tunnels under Gaza where they were planning to do and organize an army and invade Israel through these tunnels. It's insanity. To support these terrorist organizations is to support chaos. So what happens, I think, when you start sexualizing children, when you target children and you're convincing them against their biological reality that their gender is different than their sex, you try to encourage them to have sex change operations, which have permanent mutilation, lifelong consequences inflicted upon them before they've even reached puberty. So it's not only normalizing mental illness, it's celebrating mental illness, because these are, you're going to have these neo-pronouns. You're going to change the language, and fundamental left is to re-engineer the language to make evil good. So this pop culture is getting to be insanity, and watching it is not something that normal people are going to want to do. Then you can't challenge the election. So what's the 2024 election going to be? And there's concern it'll be a black swan event. Black swan events mean there are black swans, but they occur very rarely. So are we going to get now another engineered crisis? Or are we going to have what happened with Donald Trump, which was a series of first Antifas protesting in Portland, Oregon. Then you've got George Floyd, and you've got all the protests of Black Lives Matter all across the country. They take a street in Washington and paint it up Black Lives Matter. Mobs try to destroy St. John's Presbyterian Church right there, or I guess it's an Episcopal church, right there across from the White House, across from Lafayette Park, which virtually every president of the United States has been in. And the Black Lives Matter and Antifa mobs want to burn it down. Trump goes in front of it with a Bible, and he gets excoriated by the media. This is insanity. That we have Biden, who's engaged in massive corruption, and now there's an impeachment proceedings going on in the House. But again, will it amount to anything? So if obvious corruption is being left in place, and geopolitical tension is soaring, we've got the war going on in Ukraine. Now we've got the war going on with Israel and Hamas, which is expanding. I'm going to cover that in a minute, because there was a bombing yesterday in Iran, which is pretty serious in terms of its implications. But we have a major terrorist who was killed by Israel in Lebanon. Hamas is all through the region. A lot of Hamas operates out of Qatar, or Qatar, Qatar, which is a country in the Middle East, which again is supporting terrorism. And we have a U.S. military base there. Okay, so we're right now at the edge of having Lebanon and Hezbollah enter the war directly. Syria has been sending missiles into Israel. Syria is on the northeast of Israel, and Lebanon's to the north of Israel. Egypt built a wall so the Palestinians don't come into Egypt. They don't want the Palestinians. Palestinians have caused insurrections every place they've been. And with the economy at massive accelerating debt, so we're going to hit $35 trillion in debt faster than we hit $34 trillion in debt because of the acceleration of this printing money and the global debt, and nobody seems to care. So the Fed is propping up the economy by trying to say, well, we'll not have so many interest rate raises, and that keeps the stock market at inflated prices. But yet for the average American, you're getting stagflation, which means it's getting more expensive to maintain a middle-class standard of life. All of this is insanity, but it is engineered insanity. And again, I've been writing about this. I'm trying to explain to people with the book on neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy, that these are architected mind viruses. They're like malware of the brain, and it's architected. The left has carefully, through decades, realized techniques of causing such disruption, so many crises, one after the other, that they are essentially trying to negate capitalism, to negate basically the Enlightenment, saying we're not going to trust reason. At the core of the Frankfurt School was the attack on the Enlightenment, because they said, well, Enlightenment produced Hitler. Well, the Enlightenment was a movement that said through science, through rationality, through investigations, we can learn more about the world, we can master the world in terms of technology, and we've done that. But yet, this movement against science in which you have people publishing articles with fake data. You have peer-reviewed journals that will only publish ideologically correct articles. You've got the censorship on a massive basis. All of this is designed to destroy traditional values, traditional belief in human rationality, the idea that there is an objective reality. I mean, I focus a lot on Baudrillard. Baudrillard was this French modernist, postmodernist, and he said basically that everything is a simulacra or a simulation. In other words, we don't have reality. We have constructs of reality that are narratives. So he wrote a book during the Iraq War in 2000 that basically said that the Iraq War wasn't happening, the first Iraq War. Well, he knew it was happening. What he meant was that the argument that it was about Saddam Hussein and the invasion of Kuwait was a narrative, because at the end of the war, Saddam Hussein remained in power. We sent all these nations sent these military in to Iraq. We had the advancement up towards Baghdad, and then we declared a victory. Saddam Hussein stayed. The armies left. We had parades, and nothing changed. So Baudrillard says that was all a fake narrative, that was engineered. And he said more radically that everything is a narrative. So therefore, we can create narratives based around the idea of, let's imagine no police and make that the future. Well, no police means, and letting out criminals from jail means you're going to have an increasingly violent society. And that's what it has produced. Why? Because there's a natural law there, which is if you do not stop crime, you're going to get more criminals. And such behavior has to be policed in order to have an orderly society. But it finally occurs to you that the radical left does not want an orderly society. They want chaos, because it will destroy and it'll negate. They don't know what the future is going to be, but they imagine that it's going to be utopia, because we'll have no police. Everyone will just get along. We'll have no borders, so therefore there will be no wars between nations. Yet the immigrants who do not assimilate, the Muslim populations that are coming into Europe are not assimilating. They're creating Sharia law in sections of France where the police just don't go. And if you report on that, it will be censored. So this is an insane world. And I think the American people, the average American person, is just tired of it. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why Donald Trump's popularity has soared. Because Donald Trump is the entire 2024 is going to be about Donald Trump. It's going to be can we keep this economy going so we don't have a global crash during 2024? Can we get to the election so we can engineer a Democratic victory and maintain power? We're going to have Michelle Obama at the last minute be the candidate because the Democrats are in such disarray and Biden has no chance of winning unless the election is stolen. And you can't steal the election with this massive number of people opposing it. And if you take Donald Trump off the ballot, you're only increasing his popularity. So the bottom line is the American people are tired of this and are not buying it any longer. You can't sell this. The dogs won't eat this dog food. It's too insane. But it's popular at the universities. So the solution is defund the universities. And that's happening. Universities that are going to support Hamas are going to lose their Jewish funders, going to lose their Jewish students. Harvard, if all Harvard's going to do is teach a woke culture, so if a professor dares to use the wrong pronoun, they lose tenure, thrown out of the university. This is an ideological hell where you have to be insane and woke in order to function and perform. Chris, your thoughts?
The woke people are those annoying kids that we grew up with in school that always wanted attention and cried and whined when things didn't go their way, or the math problems were too hard for them, and they screeched and cried about it, whether it be in school or at home. And they're always looking for ways to as adults, to make the world a better place for them to live in. Notice that. Not just a better place for all, but a better place for them to live in. Uh, a world that doesn't intimidate them. They legislate what intimidates them. They don't like Donald Trump because he's that boss that they might have had that comes into a place that's in disarray and starts straightening people out and making people actually do their jobs. These are people that just associate their emotions with uh, their real policy. This unfortunately has gotten into academia, I'm not uh, I don't want to get to the point where I go use that one little phrase that people say, if you can do, or those who can do and those who can't teach. Yes, that is rampant in academia, but it's not the case with everybody. A lot of the DEI industry they're the doers. These are the people that come in and know exactly what they're doing and why they're there, and they produce this kind of thing. I get this when it comes to the diploma mills that you find, the ones that accept 98% of people who apply. Well, you're talking about the Harvards and Yales and the larger institutions in the world where uh, people people still for generations have thought and still think that these are prestigious degrees. So you listen to somebody like a Claudine Gay who comes out and talks about pronouns and things like that, and let's just say the midwits are thinking, maybe I'll feel a little bit smarter if I follow this woke thing because people with glasses are telling me this, and that means they're pretty smart.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the insanity of all this is just overwhelming.
The rise of the midwits, if you will.
So you've got the inmates running the asylum, and in that case, instead of having meals produced, you have food fights, and that's all everything reduces down to food fights. By the way, yes, I'm on Substack now, Jerome Corsi PhD, all together, .substack.com, and I'm going to start adding a lot of different information on that, including essays, a lot of things from the various books I've written, and I'm all creating different categories on the Substack, so you can look at different types of articles, and I'm going to start doing a lot more interviewing of the doctors again. I've gone back into the telemedicine, and we'll be talking about that in the next few weeks. Let's move on.
Well,
go ahead,
first
Chris.
thing, Dr. Corsi, you show a lot of restraint on this program. Okay, you bring up a lot of truth here, and I'm not saying that just because I'm your producer. The fact is, though, we've been dinged by YouTube quite a few times.
Yeah, so YouTube is, as soon as you mention a certain topic, YouTube is it's just a matter of time until YouTube throws me off again.
But on Substack, you're going to find Dr. Corsi uncensored, and that, my friends, is going to be a lot of fun.
That's where I'm going to be starting to post a lot more material, and I've started it last weekend, and I'll be actively posting throughout January to get quite a bit of content up in Substack. And I will definitely appreciate all those who do become subscribers. Let's go on. I want to do one more story. There was a bombing in Iran yesterday, a massive bombing, where you had it was a memorial for Soleimani. Now, Soleimani was a general in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and he was responsible for a lot of the spreading of terrorism throughout the region. And his aim was to drive the United States out of the Middle East altogether. Now, he was killed by the United States and with a drone attack in 2000. And this was a huge loss to Iran because Soleimani was one of their most effective assassins and murderers, spreaders of revolution, spreading of the radical Islamic terror throughout the Middle East. And yesterday there was a bombing at there was a ceremony at his tomb, Soleimani's tomb, in a city in the south of Iran, to commemorate their top commander, Soleimani, who was killed by a U.S. drone in 2020. And of course, Iran then went insane. The videos of this, there were thousands of people at this memorial, and these two massive bombs went off. And the crowds, of course, then fled in disarray, and it was chaos. But on January 3rd, 2020, the U.S. had a drone strike It was at Baghdad airport, and Soleimani was killed. Soleimani was commander of what they call the QUDS, the Quds force, which is essentially a Jerusalem, take back Jerusalem force, take back Jerusalem for Islam. The Quds force is the overseas arm of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC. Soleimani ran the clandestine operations abroad and was a key figure in Iran's campaign, again, to drive the U.S. out of the Middle East. Now, in that 2020 attack was a time when the United States and Iran could have gone directly to war, and it was on the verge of it. And I would say that the Biden administration has been characterized by an expansion of wars throughout the world. We have this massive war going on in Ukraine, and right now the Russians are in a very solid defensive position, controlling eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine along the Black Sea, with the possible exception of Odessa. And the Russians are now bombarding Kiev, or Kiev as they call it today, the capital of Ukraine, which is certainly into the western central part of the country. Now, again, this is an expansion of the war. And if Russia takes Kiev or Kiev, that's going to be a dramatic move. This Zelensky running around the world begging for money. The Ukraine war is no longer the popular leftist meme. It's not the narrative the left wants to support. Right now, the left is supporting Hamas. They've thrown Ukraine to the dogs because Zelensky failed, and there's no possible way that he can be successful unless we would provide armaments that would engage the United States and the EU or NATO directly in a war with Russia. And I don't think that would succeed, because our military today is so dramatically weakened, been so watered down from warriors. You got men in dresses running the armed services, and they're probably better able to have a transgender parade down Fifth Avenue. Certainly, we couldn't even get all the equipment out of Afghanistan, billions of dollars worth of military equipment we just left there, and the evacuation from Afghanistan that Biden engineered and the Pentagon managed was chaotic. You had these huge cargo planes lifting off and people trying to hold on to them to escape Afghanistan, which is insane. The amount of insanity in the world today is intensified, and it's going to continue to intensify, I think, throughout 2024. If Trump, one of the realities is that Trump could run for president from prison, and if elected, he would be able to be inaugurated president. There's precedent for this. Eugene Debs, who was a labor leader, a radical socialist labor leader in the World War I era, gave a speech in Dayton, Ohio, opposing World War I, and he was tried under the Espionage Act and put in prison for the sedition because he opposed World War I. He ran for president in 1920, I believe, and got over 1 million votes. Well, Donald Trump running for president would probably be by far the most popular candidate. And right now, the Democratic primary is disarray. Who cares? Why did anybody follow? And you've got the Republicans between DeSantis and what's her name? I can't even. I have not watched a single one of these primary debates because they're irrelevant. DeSantis doesn't have a chance. No one has a chance except for Donald Trump. And we've got the Iowa primary coming up. Who cares? In 2016, this was a big deal. It was being followed. It was being contested. We had Trump and Ted Cruz. There were real contests going on. The primary season in presidential politics has always been extremely interesting. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in 2008. These were real contests. Today, it's all orchestrated, and Donald Trump is so massively popular that he's not going to have to engage in any primary activity at all. And the GOP does not care for Donald Trump. So we've got a massive confused politics. Every place I look, whether it's economic, in terms of the debt crisis, global debt crisis, the US debt crisis, whether it's in terms of foreign policy, war in Ukraine, it could expand easily. Russia has nuclear weapons in Belarus. You find the expansion of the war is easy to imagine in the Middle East, with Israel getting into a three-front war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and with the remnants of ISIS in Syria. And this bombing in Iran is only going to intensify the radical movement, intensify this Revolutionary Guard determination to drive the United States out of the Middle East and to isolate and destroy Israel. Then you've got Taiwan over here, which could go at any moment. You've got North Korea developing intercontinental missiles that could hit the United States. And again, this amount of chaos is no longer controllable. It was not engineered to be controllable. And the disaster that's going to result from this is imminent. Now, Chris, any final comments? I'm going to wrap up for today.
It's going to be a major disaster as things move forward. And what I'm hearing, and I believe you went over this just a bit as well, what I'm hearing is neither Israel or the U.S. are responsible, supposedly, for the bombings in Iran. Yet it leads me to believe that there might be somebody in there who wants some player. Again, this is a conspiracy theory, so I'm just going to flip this out there because I'm full of them.
Iran bombed itself in order to.
I'm not saying Iran bombed itself. I'm saying another player may have made it look like Israel did it, because Iran bombing itself and killing its own people is political suicide, no matter where you are.
Well, except if you want to get more radicalism in the country and you blame it on the United States. I mean,
it's a possibility.
These scenarios today are so bizarre, and the bizarre becomes the normal in a world that is disintegrating.
Hey, has the Biden administration actually reinstated the Houthi as a terrorist organization yet? Because they pulled them off the list.
I think they're talking about it.
They're talking about it. They haven't figured out the evidence yet, have they?
Look, the Houthis are in Yemen are clearly disrupting international shipping coming out of the Red Sea. And that international shipping is also another disaster going on, because if you can't have ordinary shipping lanes through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, this is chaos. How are you going to get from Europe to India and China by requiring everybody to go around the Cape of South Africa, the tip of Africa? It's a much longer journey.
It's the scenic route. There you go.
Yeah, right.
Now, think about it this way. The Houthis aren't on the terror watch list, but all frozen yogurt makers are, because it looks like ice cream, but doesn't taste like it.
Okay. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and in the end, God always wins. God will win here too. And I think it's really the time for 2 Chronicles 7:14. The solution the Bible gives is get on our knees and ask God to heal our land. Pray for forgiveness for letting it get this crazy. We've killed too many babies in the womb. We've taken God out of our schools since the 1940s. Let's return to sanity, return to the values that have made human beings excel in a world that has become populated because of global, not warming, because we're in an interglacial warming period. It has nothing to do with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide follows warming. It doesn't cause warming. We ought to be happy that the Earth is warmer, because it's not particularly pleasant to live on this planet when it's an ice age. The judgment of God's going to come, and it's not going to be easy or pretty. But I don't think God created the human race to fail. And I believe that ultimately we will return to sanity. It's just what cost we're going to have to bear to get there. And I pray that if enough people understand and see through this and return to God, we have a chance here of getting through this transition from this dark, evil period that has descended on the United States and the world, which will not last forever. So it's Dr. Jerome Corsi with TheTruthCentral.com. We're doing podcasts every weekday. Please join us. Thank you for being here today. God bless.